انت اقترحت ان انا اتكلم على خبرتي مع الناس النوبيين لما كنت في النوبة بعمل الفيلد وورك. ف في رأيي بقى ان انا اتكلم يعني في فترة اقدر ما يكون مختصر، وبعد كده بقى لو الجماعة عندهم أسئلة يبقى في فرصة يعني ان انا اجاوب على اي سؤال اقدر اجاوب عليه. I was saying that I'm going to try to just say a few words as briefly as possible and then let people ask questions. So the background to this is that I was an employee in the Ministry of Housing. At the time, I think it was called the Ministry of Housing and Public Affairs. مش باختياري. ده الفترة دي طبعا لو أغلبكم متذكرين يعني كان ناصر بيحكم البلد وعمل قانون اللي بيه الناس اللي تتخرج من الجامعة في الميديسن انجينيرينج اند لو، الثلاثة دول يبقوا مضطرين انهم يشتغلوا في الحكومة سواء هم عاوزين او مش عاوزين، يعني مقابل الجيش. ان يعني انك انت تيجي في خدمة الجيش ده مش موضوع يتوقف على رأيك لكن بالإجبار. فهو عمل دي بالظبط بالنسبة للناس اللي هم بيتخرجوا من الجامعة، سنتين قابلة للتجديد. قابلة للتجديد معناها في الواقع يعني إنها تتجدد كل سنتين وما عندكش أي احتمال إنك أنت تستقيل. So I was there in the Ministry of Housing. The first thing I learned about Nubia, other than the background from the time I was studying in architecture, and anybody who studies architecture in Egypt, at least in that period of time, would be enamored by Professor Hassan Fathi. كلكم طبعا عارفين حسن فتحي. وانا ما كانش يعني عندي اي شيء مختلف، يا اما ان احنا نسمع للاساتذه اللي هم بيتكلموا على العماره بما فيها المودرنست اركيتكتشر بتاع اليونيفرسال يعني، او الاقتراح الوحيد المختلف عن ده كان حسن فتحي. وهو بيقول ايه حسن فتحي؟ ان احنا عندنا في البلد كل اللي احنا محتاجينه، فمش ممكن او مش مضطرين ان احنا نبص لبره يعني. لكن في رأيي بعد فترة طويلة, a long period in which I remained in touch with Hassan Fathi, I became gradually more and more skeptical. So I know that what I'm going to say now might offend some people to whom Hassan Fathi is a big guru that will never in history decline in importance. So apologies from the beginning. And the reason I became skeptical is very specific. There was an architect in the beginning of the 20th century called Somers Clark. أجنبي جه في مصر وحب مصر وسافر في مصر وسافر في النوبة وكتب كتابين أو 3 كتب مهمين جدا اللي من رأيه إن المعمار يعني Adobe architecture is the best. So Hassan Fathi never told us anything about Somers Clark. This is something I learned the hard way, and that was the beginning of skepticism. One time we were visiting him in his little apartment in the mountains or hills of Cairo, and And I was looking just around to enjoy the environment. He had, very modest living habits. That is true. It was not like he was pretending to be modest. He didn't want much in life other than to be listened to. That was the one thing that he enjoyed the most. But I was looking around, and then I found that book, one of the books by Summers Clark. I didn't know anything about it. I just made a mental note and left it at that. Years and years later, it turns out that Hassan Fathy never wrote anything about Summers Clark. Never told anybody that this man had done not only everything that Hassan Fathy tried to do later, but much more. So he kept that to himself. And when I discovered that, I became a little kind of skeptical. So that's one element in the background. I was about 25 years old in 1960. 1960 is important in that two things happened. Number one, Nasser laid the foundations that year for the hideout. Number two, literally a few days after he laid the foundations, he traveled to Abu Simbel, and the entourage, of course, around him had arranged as many Nubian people as they could possibly get together to cross from across the river, a lot of Nubua across the river from Abu Simbel, and got people in the hundreds. So it was looking very good, and he was speaking in his forceful manner. And I remember having listened in the radio to that long speech, and wondered, because he in fact said to the Nubian people who were there, treating them as a sample, so to speak, or employees of يعني مجموعة تمثل النوبيين في رأيه. فقال لهم إن يعني إحنا عملنا أغلاط يعني mistakes كتيرة in the past, but now we're going to correct all this. We're not going to leave you here in the mountains. We're going to take you in our more prosperous home. We're going to give you land as much as you have never experienced before. You're going to have schools for your kids, hospitals for your women, blah, blah, blah. Everything is going to be rosy. And he left that impression. Nobody really knows to what extent the Nubians who listened to it believed it and how much they didn't believe. I have no idea. Nobody made any attempt to establish the extent to which Nubians were skeptical. So that's another aspect of the background, 1960. I was, as I said before, employed in the Ministry of Housing. I got the reputation of being difficult to deal with because I never took yes as my typical answer when my superiors suggested something. I was always reprimanded for asking questions rather than saying yes. But you get born with certain genes, and some of it you can overcome, some of it you cannot overcome. But I got the assignment that introduced me to Nubia in a very serious way. The assignment was to develop a plan of a small, what they call village, it means settlement, in the hills of Abu Simbel, above where they're going to raise the whole temple. So it was a plateau at the highest level, and there were already contractors and construction companies and all kinds of houseboats on the river for experts from here and there and everywhere. My assignment was to develop a settlement plan for about 40 to 60 houses for technicians to live in. So I went there. I asked to go there to see the site. I went and I was taken on a tour. And all I remember is the unbelievable heat. It's still, there were coins in my pockets, in my pants pockets, that burned my skin through the cloth. And I had to always put my hand in there, I remember, awkwardly, just so that the coins don't contact my skin. That was how hot it was. So I thought, if Hassan Fathi were here, this was his dream situation, where there is absolutely no rain, not anyway in any recorded statistics, and terribly hot. And this is the perfect environment for the architecture that he always advocated. So that was my initial take when I saw the site. Other than that, on the way there and on the way back, I got introduced to some of the employees in the antiquity department. And that is also very important in my own history, because those people were mainly from the canoes, like Nubians from the canoes, and they are very knowledgeable about the river and how to navigate the river. That's like a tradition of more than 1,000 years. So they know every rock, they know every wave, they know every turn, they know everything about the river. So they were in charge of driving the motorboats up and down the river that they were called tugs. And they pulled the houseboats and they brought the houseboat back, they brought supplies and so on. I got introduced to 2 or 3 of these captains, Nubians from Iqlim canoes. And they were absolutely instrumental in making my life enjoyable, in making my work possible, because they believed in me, because I didn't mince words. I told them exactly why I'm here. Now, let me tell you why I was there when I finally went there. You remember the UNESCO campaign. The UNESCO campaign was a misnomer, because the UNESCO campaign did not care about Nubians or Nubian history or Nubian relics and records, nothing. They cared about ancient Egyptian monuments. So it is in fact very tragic, and this is not an unimportant detail. It's tragic to call this the Nubia Salvation Project, when in fact it is not Nubia salvation, it is ancient Egyptian monuments salvation. And the two are quite clearly different, but also incompatible. I remember figures that I recorded to give you just a quick example of what was happening. 40 million American dollars, 40 million at the time, American dollars spent on raising the Abu Simbel temples alone. 40 million. Compare this to 100,000 that AUC, the American University in Cairo, could get from the Ford Foundation to finance the only anthropological study of the Nubians. 4 million, 100,000. I think it gives you a very clear idea of the priorities. And I was trying to find any agency or organization, including the Aga Khan Foundation, including the UNESCO itself, including the Ministry of Culture, the Egyptian Ministry of Culture, and so on. These were days, you have to recall, before any digital technology existed or even was imagined. If you wanted to contact people, you wrote letters. I mean, actual letters, you put a stamp and you mail it and you hope against hope that you're going to get a reply. I must have written tens of letters begging on behalf of the idea of recording the Nubian civilization, begging anybody to take interest, even just in principle to take interest, let alone to commit to anything. I got some replies that were just words and nice words, but no action. Nobody was, and I was getting so furious and feeling that the time is not on our side and that somebody had to do something. And I decided I'm going to be the one to do that something. And I would confess now, and many, many years ago, I did confess the same, that at the time, I did not know what I was getting myself into. And this is not an exaggeration. 25 years old, just a few years out of architecture training, enamored by forms and drawings and ideas and so on, but very, very low in skills when it comes to the social sciences. The social sciences. In the Department of Architecture in Cairo University, where I attended, there was 2 rooms called the library. They must have had no more than 500 books all in all. Like when I look at the background where Marcus is sitting, there are more books behind him than there were books in the library of the Department of Architecture in the University of Cairo. Hardly any of them were to be called related to the social scientists. So all I knew was the skills that you acquire as an architect, how to draw, how to take architectural drawings, how to respect accuracy, how to do surveying, etc., etc. These were very valuable skills, but I didn't know anything about anthropology, history, how to do field work, nothing. Sorry, my wife is saying she's going on an errand. So imagine now this 25 years old wanting to launch that single-handed voyage into Nubia in order to record the vernacular architecture as it came to be known much later. I didn't know how to do this or even how to start. So I traveled to Aswan, met with one of the people from the antiquities department that I told you about, and confessed to him that I want to do this, but I don't know how to start. So he said, I'll get you together with a wholesale merchant, an Aswani person, who sells grains and legumes, wholesale. And my friend from the antiquity department, he said, you go tell him exactly as you would tell me what you want to do and see what he says. So I went, and he honored me, and he took me in the store, and he served tea and tea again and tea again, and we spoke and spoke. Yeah, Anne is smiling, I can see, because she knows much of that stuff. You wrote that wonderful study of Gharb Aswan, recommended for anybody who cares, yes. Anyway, so I went and met with the guy. I still have his name in my notes, Al-Haj Abbas Abu Qasim. Abbas Abu Qasim. عاوز ايه؟ قال لي عاوز تعمل ايه؟ قلت له عاوز اقعد شهر مثلا، اول كتير شهرين في النوبة، طالع ونازل، انا مش عارف امتى هقف وفين هقف وليه هقف، لكن هقرر ده وانا في النوبة. طيب قال لي ما فيش غير انك انت يا تشتري يا تأجر فلوكة، ما فيش غير كده هينفع. لأن even if he could fix me up with somebody who can lend me or rent me a motorboat, the fuel would be a nightmare in itself. And anybody who tried that, including Robert Fernier himself, who wrote that one study, talks a whole lot about the problems with the fuel. So الحاج عباس قال لي لا، ما خلينا في الفلوكة. الفلوكة هي أضمن شيء. عمل هو بقى ترتيب مع واحد من المتقاعدين who used to be captains, رويس, but retired. So he's old. But Nubian people, believe me, don't get old. They either die, or if they don't die, they don't get old. Now, I've never seen anybody who is walking with a stick. I mean, really, truly. And this is not coincidental. They take care of themselves according to traditions that go thousands of years, and most of them survive. So that retired Royce agreed to come with me, provided that I accept that he brings his son with him. And there is a very good reason for this. The felucca has an infinitely longer mast than can be supported reliably by the very shallow hull. So the only way you can deal with the sail, if you want to gather the sail when you want to park, so to speak, is to send the child up the mast all the way up, and there is a special knot in the ropes to tie the sail all the way to the mast. You cannot send a grown-up, because the weight, if that grown-up climbs near the top, would create an imbalance whereby the felucca might in fact tip. So it's established that you have to have a young person. So I said, fine. We reached an agreement, and we read the Fatiha, although I am Christian by my parents' decision, because you get born, you don't make a decision like that, you get born into it. But my heart did not lean in any direction, Jewish or Islamic or Christian. I just had this idea that if there is a God, that God will not require me to go through intermediaries. He will accept my talking to him or her directly. That was my idea from the time I was very young. So قرينا الفاتحة، وهم احترموا ان انا مسيحي ومع كده بقرا الفاتحة. ومن هنا كان اول نجاح في الخطة بتاعتي، انك تقول للناس بالحق وبالحقيقة، وما تكذبش وما تبالغش، وخلي الناس يعملوا اللي هم عاوزين. وبالظبط ده اللي انا عملته. كنت انا في النوبة رحلتين، واحدة حوالي شهرين من let me see when it was, late September 63 to mid-January 64. That is one, and then one after I just had to go back to Cairo to do some family stuff, and came back for another 2 months. When I started this, I had a lot of equipment with me, both architectural instruments and all that, as well as surveying instrument, because I wanted to do topography as well. And the kid, let us call him Farouk, which is not his real name, he got so interested, he kept asking questions like my heart's desire. I love nothing more than people who open themselves to new experiences. What is this for? What's that for? He got totally enamored by a brass pencil sharpener. Most of you around my age or a little younger would remember that the original brass pencil sharpeners. They're very, very sharp, and they do work, unlike the plastic ones that kids these days use. They're good for nothing. Anyway, and ask about everything. and learned, so much so that he became an actual assistant to hold, for example, the zero part of the measuring yard so that we can measure, to remind me if I forget something, to do this, to do that. And I told his father, we were maybe no more than 10 days into our project. I told him, I'm going to pay a salary to your son on my own when we go back to Aswan, because he can't be working for free. That is the capitalist world of the 19th century, but in Nubia, we cannot do that. So he was very joyed. The boy was very joyed because I told him that's what, and that was the second success. The third success came when I confined in a man in Dabood. Dabood is very close to Aswan. That what I wanted is to get to see what Nubian people consider to be a beautiful house and what they consider to be not a beautiful house. That was very important event in my project. So this man told me, okay, you come there, we have a wanasa. Wanasa, probably most people understand, is a tradition in Nubia whereby after sunset, people get together. It doesn't matter in whose house, because you take turns. So if you're not in this person's house today, you will be eventually 2 weeks later or whatever it is. And they chat. Hence the notion of wanasa, being together, chatting. No agenda, no particular themes. They just talk. And they talk and talk up until everybody gets tired and we go home. And I discovered that this is the forum in which I'm going to take my field notes. So the guy from the booth took me to this wanasa in which he said, the engineer, because in the Nubian vocabulary, there isn't much difference between engineer and architect. That to them is confusing. So everybody is an engineer. And my felucca was called the engineer's felucca. And it had a little yellow flag at the very top. I thought yellow would be different from anybody else's felucca, which it was, except in 2 days, the yellow became white from the strength of the sun. So I had to change the flag every now and then to keep it yellow. And everybody knew this was the engineer. And the engineer was doing that which UNESCO did not do or will not do. That was the summary of what people knew I was there to do. In that wanasa, people convinced me that even to raise the question in terms of beauty and absence of beauty is to miss almost 90% of everything that is important to Nubian people. Now that's a shock to somebody 25 years old, knows nothing more than what he was taught in architecture. But I had to take it. And I remember not being able to sleep that night, figuring out how do I reconfigure my plan in view of this very fundamental discussion that the Nubian people from the booth had amongst them. And it transpired that what would really be the real question to ask is what would constitute an acceptable or to the gods or to the spirits, which means in real life as opposed to, you know, what the anthropologists think. When Nubian people talk about the gods or the spirits under the water or above the water, etc., what they really mean is tradition. They will not talk about tradition. That's too theoretical. But they will talk in proverbs. Meher knows that more than anybody, more than me for sure. And they speak about things that did not happen, but without any effort to convince young people that that actually happened. So it was always ambiguous and left ambiguous. So when people talked about the spirits or the evil ones and the good spirits and this and that, and El Buma, what is the Buma in English? The bird that has this big face, and the Buma, I remember the word maybe. Anybody has an idea what is it called in English? The Buma. It's a bird with a big head and small body, and it looks very fearful.
It's an owl, isn't it, Meher?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's it. It's an active ingredient in most of the mythology, because if it stands on somebody's house, it could mean bad news. If it doesn't do that, if it does whatever it is. Anyway, but I got the notion from that Wanasa in the booth that the real question to ask is what constitutes abiding by criteria of tradition and history, and what pleases the gods and what does not please the gods, etc. Al-Mushahara. And Jennings will be able to tell us much more than I can do about Al-Mushahara. Al-Mushahara, correct me, Anne, if I'm wrong, because this is really not my point of expertise. Al-Mushahara is when people run into problems with the good gods because they violate dictates that they should have respected. So then there would not be retaliation, but there would be absence of favor. The good gods are not evil. The good gods don't punish, but they have the ability to withhold their support. They withhold their approval. They withhold their favors. But if you please them, they become on your side. They help you achieve what you want to achieve. They protect you against your enemies, etc., etc. So it transpires long after I left Nubia and came back home and started studying social studies and social science and reading the good works of the likes of Anne's work, that in fact, this is the way it works. Good houses are houses that meet with the approval of the good gods and do not create any possibility of ill-doing or mushahara. And the bad houses are the ones that don't respect them. And it translates into something which I could deal with very, very easily because the criteria are simple. The house has to be whitewashed and repeatedly in order for it to please the spirits. It has to have ataba, so that no door you can access from outside to inside on the same plane. Because if you do that, then the bad spirits would go under the wooden door. So you have to have ataba. You have to have this, you have to have that, you have to have those dishes on top of the doors. They are not stolen from hospitals and from hotels, as some people had said. They are not just fancy. They mean, speaking to the spirits, please ensure that our house always has food. That's the simple idea. It means, you know, directing the attention of the gods to their house, saying, when you favor people with good livelihood, remember us. That's the extent of, and so on. So that was a memorable moment And I'm about done, by the way, so don't despair. Another example of a totally important moment in my journey there. In fact, two. One is when I got bitten by a scorpion and I lost consciousness and I walked in full strength. I don't know how many hours later they told me, but they fixed me right on the spot. I don't know what I would have done if I weren't taken care of by my Nubian hosts. It probably would have been fatal because the poison travels and it's a matter of time before the scorpion poison would get you. So that would, but the most important event was when this young girl, somewhere, I think El Malki from Al-Alliqat, they speak Arabic. So she could speak directly to me in Arabic, because unfortunately, I spoke none of the two Nubian dialects. That's a weakness in the whole world, but it's a fact of life. And this young girl was watching me do this and do that, and when I was done and walking down to take my felucca, she stopped me and asked me like 20 questions, maybe even more. What are you doing here? Why are you so white? Where are your parents? How come your parents let you go like this? Do they know where you are? Is this felucca yours, or did you steal it? Like lovely, 9, 10 years old spirit. And answering questions, I answered as if I'm answering any one of you, as a grown-up, as a respected adult. No baby talk, no nonsense. And at the end, when I put all my stuff in the boat and we were ready to go, she said to me, "Shukri, اكتب وارسم عشان الناس تفتكرنا." Write and draw so that people would remember us. That to me gave me, I wrote it in big letters in one of my notebooks on the cover so that I read it every day, because that to me was the best summary, rich summary of what my objective should be: to write and draw so that people can remember the Nubian people. I have no other objective in the book that I still have not published, another story, other than that objective. Now I'm going to stop here and hopefully answer any questions that you might have that I can answer.